In order to help bring this issue down to size, I made some new friends. Let's meet them, shall we? This is Joe Cirincione, the president of the Plowshares Fund, a global security fund focused on nuclear weapons issues. He directed the Nonproliferation Project at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, worked as a staffer in Congress, and wrote a book. Joe, could you hold that up? Thanks. It's called Bomb Scare, and it's a primer on how we got to a world of 20,000 nuclear weapons. I read it, so should you. Next up, we have Rihanna Tyson. Miss Tyson is a program officer for the Global Security Institute. She delivered the first ever non-governmental presentation on outer space security to the United Nations General Assembly.
On behalf of civil society everywhere, let me thank you and the Secretariat, all of delegations.
Finally, we have Mr. Darrell Kimball, the Executive Director of the Arms Control Association since September 2001. Mr. Kimball has aided many policymakers in Washington, including President Barack Obama, who enlisted Mr. Kimball's help in writing nuclear arms control legislation when he was still a U.S. Senator. The building to my left is the UN General Assembly, where important diplomats meet every year in order to discuss the world's problems. Too bad the same amount of attention isn't being paid to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That treaty's the key piece of paper that's held non-nuclear nations in check all these years. And it's breaking down thanks to the last 8 years of a foreign policy that ignores treaties. That's not all. In this segment, we look at the problems facing us on the foreign policy front of the fight to keep nukes in the right hands.
The problem with the current system of nuclear proliferation is that it's on the edge of collapse. For over 40 years, presidents, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, have put together this interlocking network of treaties and agreements and security assurances that has effectively slowed, if not altogether prevented, the spread of nuclear weapons. So instead of having 30 or 40 countries with nuclear weapons, as was feared in the 50s and 60s, we now have 9. That's 9 too many, but it's far better than a world where many countries, large and small, stable and unstable, have nuclear weapons. But this system is now teetering on the edge of collapse. The countries without nuclear weapons have lost faith in the promise that the nuclear weapon states have made to get rid of their arsenals. The unity between the nuclear weapon states itself has shattered, and there's disagreements over where to go and how to proceed.
When you think about it, the NPT itself is actually a discriminatory regime, wherein some states can have these genocidal weapons and other states cannot have them. And even to get more technical about it and just to delve deeper into that, some technologies that some states can have, other states cannot have. What's okay for Japan apparently is not okay for Iran. Not that I'm justifying Iran in any way, but this is how Iran is looking at it.
And I would say most importantly, we've lost the vision. Where are we going? Are nuclear weapons important for security or not? Are they part of our salvation, or are they our curse? Without that clear vision on a global scale of what our purpose is, of what role nuclear weapons play, if any, in the world, I'm afraid we're going to drift further, and that drift will probably bring us right over the edge of the falls, causing a collapse of the treaty arrangements and then an all-out arms race, where many countries will be seeking the illusory security that nuclear weapons promise.
Another great problem with the NPT regime, we're thinking about the ways in which the rules are not being implemented and adhered to. The major bargain of the NPT regime is twofold, right? So states who don't have nuclear weapons sign up to never get them in exchange for two things. One is the promise by the nuclear weapon states, the 5 that are allowed to have them, that they are going to get rid of their own nuclear weapons at an early date. And the second reason why countries without nuclear weapons sign up to the NPT regime is so that they can get the technology and the resources they need for nuclear power, what's called peaceful nuclear purposes. So this second bargain has been severely undermined just very recently by this deal that the U.S. has struck with India, wherein the U.S. would supply, and others too, can supply India with the technology and the materials, the fissile materials, for their peaceful nuclear program. Now, India is not a signatory to the NPT, and so if you are a non-nuclear weapon state that has signed up to the NPT, and you see that the nuclear weapon states are not getting rid of their nuclear weapons, and this guy, India, who hadn't signed up to the treaty in the first place, is getting all the benefits that you may or may not have yourself.
There are a number of countries that are thinking about or are seeking the capability to make nuclear weapons. North Korea and Iran are the two most best known countries. They are trying to acquire the ability to produce bomb material, highly enriched uranium or plutonium. North Korea already has this capability. So long as the major nuclear weapon states, including the United States, Russia, France, Great Britain, China, Israel, Pakistan, and India have nuclear weapons, we can expect that other countries are going to seek nuclear weapons in order to attain status, power, and prestige.
To think of it really more in the broader sense, the biggest problem with the nonproliferation regime, why we really can't guarantee that other states won't get nuclear weapons, is because nuclear weapons, unlike biological weapons or chemical weapons, and increasingly maybe landmines or hopefully cluster munitions, nuclear weapons are still considered an acceptable weapon for some people to have. Nobody considers the plague to be an acceptable weapon for any state to use. And this is the sort of mentality that we need to be applying to nuclear weapons as well. They are genocidal, they are ecocidal, and they're suicidal. If you are pointing nuclear weapons at somebody, somebody is pointing them at you. So this idea that we can annihilate a city, a people, and with such disastrous effects for the entire globe cannot be accepted any longer. We really need to be thinking not of a non-proliferation regime, but of a global prohibition regime.
Today is September 11th, 2008. Behind me is the place where the World Trade Centers used to stand. If you walk around New York City today, you would see New Yorkers and people from all over looking solemn and nervous. Of two buildings collapsing in a major American city has this kind of effect on our national psyche. Just imagine what the destruction of a major city would do. In this segment of the film, we're going to talk about major nuclear threats worldwide.
The first and the most important is nuclear terrorism. The idea that Al-Qaeda could get a nuclear weapon and bring it to New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, detonate that bomb, destroying a major American city, raising the prospect of further nuclear attacks. And even that prospect would cause a fundamental change in the political structure of our country. You could take the Bill of Rights and put it up on the shelf and you might never see it again. So even though the risk of a terrorist attack is small, the consequences are so huge that this has got to be our #1 national security objective.
Worldwide, there are hundreds of tons of uranium, plutonium of various sorts. Many of these are stored in facilities that are not completely secure. We don't know exactly where all of the nuclear material is. And for some 15 years since the end of the Cold War, the United States and Russia have been working well and quickly to try to secure the so-called loose nuclear material, primarily in Russia and other former Soviet states. But the job isn't done, and there are other countries in which there are nuclear material stockpiles that could be vulnerable to theft or sale to terrorist organizations or to some country that wants to build nuclear weapons.